We're taking a look at alternative sports, and we're taking a look at a particular one which gained a lot of traction towards the end of last year with that controversial Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and Formula One. We are now joined today by a South African motorsport legend to help us understand the sport of motorsport even better. Good morning, Tschops Siphuka, and welcome to Sports on Morning Live.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Now, Tschops, firstly, a massive congratulations to you and your team for getting a podium finish in the Kyalami 9-hour on Saturday. But talk us through the difficulty of getting such a good result on a track that you're very familiar with.
Well, it all boils down to preparation. Failure to prepare is you're just inviting a scenario where you would not be able to finish the races where it matters the most. But what had got into when we went into Kyalami, I think we were fully prepared. What saved us was a shakedown we did in December at some stage, doing it in Killarney in Cape Town, where we had mechanical failure on the car, which was as a result of a clutch that went wrong, and we had a gearbox problem. So had we not done the shakedown in Cape Town, we would have seen that problem fester into the 9-hour. So full preparation is very important, and there's no substitution for sit time. And then it becomes also imperative that the team must gel as one.
Certainly. Now, today we're looking at alternative sports to your football, your cricket and your rugby, and we're looking at motorsport. How does a young man from the dusty streets of Umtata find himself on the top tracks in the country, emulating legends such as Cyril van der Merwe?
Yeah, well, Kumbu, to be precise, a small rural village situated on the N2. So it was all a dream come true for me. I think I'm quite fortunate and quite blessed to actually live through my lifetime and live my dream and also become a national motorsport champion. So the desire had been there from childhood. I had the opportunity of having parents that had owned a car. And my grandfather, very instrumental, my mother instrumental, my grandmother instrumental, came from a very galvanized, structured family that wanted you to know what you want. Black was black, white was white, there was never a gray color. So early on, you had to be very disciplined in how you portray yourself, mannerism, and what you actually want to achieve in life. So by watching the likes of Terry Moss, Ayrton Senna in Formula One, Nigel Mansell, Cyril van der Merwe, all those people, they became the inspiration for me to actually try and see what I could get in the sport and do the best I can. I was fortunate that I met my mentor, my role model, which was Terry Moss, and the skill was honed by him, prepared me for where we are now, because that's the journey that started in 1998.
Certainly. Now we look at the opportunities that exist within motorsport. Tell us more about the different opportunities, because I think the general mindset that we have as lay people in the sport is that if you're not a fast driver, there's no place for you in the motorsport industry.
Well, there's definitely a place in motorsport. If you're not going to be a driver, you could choose marshalling. If you're not going to be a driver, you could choose the engineering part or the mechanical part, or being a steward, or being anything that's got to do within the sport. So marshalling are the guys that actually help us during the day when there's danger ahead. They flag certain flags showing signals on where the danger lies and why we must be careful. So the stewards on the day are the people that use a book. The book is called the White Book. It's got rules that determine the penalties and driver conduct, so on and so forth. If you're not in that department, you could be in the scrutineering department, which encompasses a fully technical team that ensures that the cars are legal and they are ready to go onto the racetrack and race.
Let's move on to looking at motorsports and how it is a massive participation sport, and it's on the rise in South Africa. But let's look at the commercial side of it. Is it on the rise in the commercial aspect? Because, ultimately everyone wants to get to a point where they can race in Europe, but when you start off in South Africa, is it something that can sustain you and that is commercial?
I think it's a quite sad scenario in South Africa where motorsport had sort of taken a dive from the early 1998s coming to this point in time. But remember, it's a sport that requires a lot of financial backing, and it can only be possible when manufacturers are involved and the big corporates, conglomerates are also involved. And so for a man of color or a black child that comes in from the rural villages and all that stuff, he needs to have a very solid background and have exposure to these things to be able to make it in the world. But more importantly, to answer some of a certain part of your question, the commercial viability of it, there is definitely a lot of residual in motorsports, primarily because, remember, we're presenting brands that are out there. You've got all your car manufacturers that would like to put in their vehicles on a racetrack, which becomes a laboratory of what their brands are about. Because at the end of the day, when you manufacture a car, you're going to take it to a racetrack to shake it down, to make sure all components are working in synergy. So as long as there are motor vehicles out there, they need to be tested. They need the right platforms. They need the right people to showcase their brands. And that's why the sport has taken quite a massive uphill in Europe. I think they appreciate it more than probably we appreciate it in this country. But that doesn't deter those people who have been in the sport, who love the sports, who will continue supporting the sports, because it takes a lot. You know, there's an element of safety that it brings to people in general who are car drivers. There's a lot of togetherness that it brings for families to unite and support their children in the karting fraternity. So it keeps the kids away from trouble, and it solely hones them to focus on something.
Tschops, now I understand that when you were telling us about your background, and I want us to delve a bit deeper into the opportunities that exist in the present moment for youngsters that are looking to get into the sport of motorsport. Now, you were quite fortunate that you had a mentor who almost gave you a way in and guided you. But what does a young Tschops sitting at home right now in the village or in the township or wherever they are, how do they get into the sport of motorsports, and what are those opportunities that are currently available for youngsters in South Africa?
Right. I'm going to try and respond to that to the best of my ability, because the opportunities come in different ways. As again I said, there is marshalling, right? Some guys will worm themselves into marshalling, and then from there they'll worm themselves into a team from a mechanical aspect, and then from there they'll probably be a driver, so on and so forth. But it makes it very difficult because there are no hardcore programs and institutions that are put in place to teach these kids who come from the rural backgrounds, who want to be part of a global audience or global sport. And the challenge with that is that because it requires funding, there's not a lot of people who are prepared to put their money out there and support those kids who want to be in the sport. And the difference is people who have been in the sport for years, who have been able to accumulate the necessary equities to propel their own kids into the sport, because that's how it's been working all the years. So a guy who's got nothing takes from nothing. I just think I'm been the fortunate and one of the blessed ones that was able to come into the sport and be able to do what I needed to do to shine and lead in that role. So what you see today is a product of many people at home, teachers choosing the right subjects, because to be in the sport, you can never succeed. You'll never be able to excel much if you don't have maths and science, because that part is quite instrumental from an engineering perspective and from just understanding the geometry of how vehicles are set up. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be dealing with numbers, whether you're dealing with an engine, CCs, whether you're going to be dealing with the geometry of the car, setting it up 1 degree, 2 degree, ride heights. That means it's the relationship between the car and the road and how high it is from the ground. So all those aspects require to have maths.
We come back to maths and science once again. Now, Charles, let's talk about Formula One in particular. can we see it coming back to South Africa, or is it just too expensive? And I mean, as we grow and we know more about the sport of motorsport, we even know that South Africa actually had a Formula One champion at some point.
Yes, I think firstly, I think it's important not to doubt South Africans, because Jody Scheckter, a South African, born and bred, did become a Formula One world champion earlier parts in Formula One. And more importantly, I think with this international racing being introduced into South Africa, like the 9 hour, with Formula One having come on Netflix, I think everybody now is starting to follow Formula One and have a voice and something that is spectacular on a global platform. So I do think when the hunger is enough, we are going to get a Formula One Grand Prix into South Africa. Up until then, it's going to be hearsay. It's going to be, they'll probably try and put it together. But I do think in the next coming few years, we should have Formula One in this country. Kalami is a good circuit to host it. There is no other circuit that is built at that level now. But in time, we will see.
And finally, as I wrap up with you, Tschops, let's talk about this upcoming Formula One season. We know it ended up controversially last year with, of course, Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. What do you foresee happening this season? I mean, we also saw Lewis now back on social media after he was quiet since Abu Dhabi.
I think it's going to be a spectacular season. I think we're going to still have Max Verstappen. We'll have Lewis Hamilton there. With the dynamics of the new cars, I do think there's going to probably be another third manufacturer and a fourth manufacturer between Ferrari and McLaren. And hopefully maybe Renault will also come onto the party. But these four are going to be neck and neck with each other. So we can be expecting another war between Max and Lewis Hamilton.
Tschops, thank you so much for your time this morning. Have a blessed day further.
Thank you very much.